The dust storm rolled into Castle Dome, Arizona, like a living creature, swallowing the afternoon sun and turning the sky the color of dried blood. But Ethan Reeves barely noticed as he rode his tired horse down the main street, his mind fixed on nothing more than a hot meal and a cold beer after 3 weeks of driving cattle through the unforgiving desert. It was September 1882, and the heat still clung to everything like a second skin, baking the wooden buildings and dirt roads until the whole town seemed to shimmer with exhaustion. Ethan dismounted outside the saloon, his legs stiff from days in the saddle, and tied his horse to the hitching post with practiced efficiency. He was 26 years old, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. His hands were calloused and scarred from years of working ranches across the territory, and his face bore the kind of weathered look that came from too many nights sleeping under stars and too few days spent in the shade. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies, but at least it was cooler than outside. Ethan made his way to the bar, nodding to a few familiar faces, and ordered whiskey and whatever food the kitchen had ready. The bartender, a grizzled man named Joe who had been pouring drinks in Castle Dome since before the town had a proper name, slid a glass across the worn wood and jerked his thumb toward the back room where meals were served. Ethan carried his drink to one of the rough-hewn tables and sat down with a sigh that came from somewhere deep in his bones. The cattle drive had been brutal, losing 2 men to heat sickness and nearly a dozen head to a flash flood that had come out of nowhere in the middle of the night. But the pay had been good, and his pockets were heavier than they had been in months. He could afford to rest for a few days, maybe get his horse reshod and buy some new supplies before heading north toward Prescott, where he heard there was work at one of the mines. A woman emerged from the kitchen carrying plates of food, and Ethan felt his breath catch in his throat. She was young, probably around 21 or 22, with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun and eyes so deep brown they were nearly black. Her dress was faded and patched in several places, but she carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with her surroundings. She moved between the tables with efficient grace, setting down plates and refilling drinks, and when she approached Ethan's table, he found himself sitting up straighter, suddenly aware of how dusty and disheveled he must look. "Beef stew and cornbread," she said, her voice soft but clear. "That is all we have today." "That sounds perfect, thank you," Ethan said, and was rewarded with a small smile that transformed her tired face into something luminous. She returned a few minutes later with his meal, and as she set the plate down, Ethan noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Her wrists were thin, almost fragile-looking, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of exhaustion that went deeper than a few missed hours of sleep. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, concern overriding his usual reticence with strangers. She straightened quickly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I am fine, sir. Is there anything else you need?" "No, this is fine. Thank you." She nodded and moved away, but Ethan found his eyes following her as she made her way back to the kitchen. There was something about her that troubled him, though he could not quite put his finger on what it was. She seemed too delicate for this rough place, too refined somehow, despite her worn clothing and obvious poverty. He ate his meal slowly, savoring every bite after weeks of trail food and dried meat. The stew was good, rich and hearty, and the cornbread was still warm from the oven. As he ate, he watched the woman move through the room, noting how she paused occasionally to steady herself against a table or chair, how her smile seemed forced when she spoke to the other customers, how she moved with the careful deliberation of someone conserving every ounce of energy. When she returned to collect his empty plate, Ethan tried again. "That was the best meal I have had in a month. My compliments to the cook." "I will tell her," the woman said, and this time her smile seemed more genuine. "Are you just passing through Castle Dome?" "Depends on what kind of work I can find. I am a cattleman mostly, but I can turn my hand to most things. There is always work at the mines, though it is dangerous, and some of the ranches north of here are usually looking for hands. What about you? Have you been in Castle Dome long?" Something flickered across her face, too quick for him to read. "Nearly 6 months now. I work here at the saloon and do laundry and mending for some of the families in town. That sounds like hard work." "It is honest work," she said, a note of pride entering her voice. "I earn my own way." Before Ethan could respond, a loud crash came from the other side of the room. A drunk miner had knocked over his chair and was now shouting at another man about a poker game gone wrong. The woman hurried away to help calm the situation, and Ethan watched as she spoke quietly to the angry miner, somehow diffusing his rage with nothing more than soft words and a gentle hand on his arm. It was an impressive display of composure, and Ethan found himself admiring her even more. He finished his whiskey and paid his bill, leaving an extra $1 on the table for the woman. As he left the saloon, he glanced back and saw her staring at the money with an expression of such naked relief that it made his chest tighten. She looked up and their eyes met for a moment, and then she smiled and nodded her thanks, and Ethan felt something shift inside him, something he had not felt in a very long time. The next morning, Ethan woke early in his rented room above the general store and set about getting his affairs in order. He took his horse to the blacksmith for new shoes, bought supplies for the trail, and asked around about work. The mine superintendent told him they could use another man willing to go down into the shafts, but Ethan had spent enough time underground to know he preferred the open sky, even when it was trying to kill him with heat or cold. One of the ranchers mentioned needing someone to break some wild horses he had bought, and that sounded more promising, so Ethan agreed to ride out the next day to take a look. With his business concluded, he found himself back at the saloon for lunch, telling himself it was just because the food was good and the prices reasonable. The woman was there again, looking even more tired than the day before, and Ethan felt that same pang of concern. He ordered the daily special, which turned out to be salt pork and beans, and settled in to eat while surreptitiously watching her work. She moved through her duties with the same quiet efficiency, but today she seemed slower, more hesitant, and twice he saw her press a hand to her stomach as if it pained her. When she brought his food, her hands were shaking so badly that the plate rattled against the table as she set it down. "Miss, are you sure you are all right?" Ethan asked, unable to keep the worry from his voice. "You look ill." "I am just tired," she said, but her voice was thin and strained. "The heat makes everyone tired. Have you eaten today?" The question seemed to surprise her, and she hesitated a moment too long before answering. "Of course. Now if you will excuse me, I have other customers to attend to." But Ethan was not fooled by her deflection. He had seen enough hungry people in his life to recognize the signs. The way she moved with careful precision to conserve energy, the hollow look in her eyes, the trembling hands. He ate his own meal, but his appetite had diminished, replaced by a growing determination to understand what was happening with this woman who had somehow captured his attention so completely. After lunch, he walked around town, making casual conversation with shopkeepers and residents, and slowly pieced together the woman's story. Her name was Olivia Zimmerman, and she had come to Castle Dome 6 months earlier from somewhere back east, though no one seemed to know exactly where. She had no family in town, no husband or relatives to look after her, and she worked every hour she could to pay for her tiny room in a boarding house on the edge of town. The general store owner mentioned that she sometimes traded mending work for food, and the boarding house keeper said she was behind on her rent but too proud to accept charity. The picture that emerged was of a young woman struggling to survive in a harsh land, barely making enough to keep body and soul together, and Ethan felt his respect for her growing with every new detail. She had not given up or sold herself into one of the less respectable occupations available to desperate women in frontier towns. Instead, she worked herself to exhaustion maintaining her dignity and independence, and there was something admirable in that, something that spoke to Ethan's own sense of pride and self-reliance. That evening, he returned to the saloon for dinner, and this time he paid closer attention to Olivia's interactions with the other customers. What he saw made his blood run cold. An older woman came in, poorly dressed and accompanied by two small children who looked half-starved. They sat at a corner table, and Ethan watched as Olivia went to take their order. There was a quiet conversation, too low for him to hear, but he saw the woman shake her head and pull out a few coins, counting them carefully. It was clearly not enough for 3 meals, maybe not even enough for one. Olivia stood there for a long moment, looking down at the woman and children, and then she did something that made Ethan's heart constrict in his chest. She went to the kitchen and returned with 3 plates of food, the same beef stew and cornbread that Ethan had enjoyed the day before. She set them down in front of the family, waved away the woman's coins, and said something that made the woman's eyes fill with tears. The children fell on the food like wolves, and Olivia watched them with a sad smile before turning away and continuing her work. Ethan finished his own meal, his mind racing. He stayed at the saloon until closing time, nursing a beer and playing cards with some of the local men, and he watched as Olivia cleaned tables and swept floors and did all the end-of-day tasks required of her. Other workers disappeared into the kitchen at various points, presumably to eat their own meals, but Olivia never did. She just kept working, moving slower and slower as the evening wore on, until finally Joe the bartender sent her home with a gruff command to get some rest. Ethan left the saloon a few minutes after Olivia did, and he followed at a discreet distance as she walked through the dark streets toward the boarding house. She moved like someone in a dream, placing each foot carefully as if the ground might give way beneath her, and twice she had to stop and lean against a building to catch her breath. When she finally reached the boarding house and disappeared inside, Ethan stood in the shadows for a long time, thinking about what he had witnessed. She had given away her own meal. That much was clear. She had probably been planning to eat the dinner she served to that family, saving it from her wages or trading work for it. And then, when confronted with people even more desperate than herself, she had given it away without hesitation. It was an act of such selfless generosity that it shook something loose inside Ethan, something that had been frozen for a long time. He had been alone for most of his adult life, drifting from job to job and town to town, never putting down roots or forming attachments that might tie him to one place. After his parents died when he was 17, killed by fever on the family farm in Texas, he had sold everything and headed west, looking for something he could never quite name. He had learned to rely only on himself, to expect nothing from others and offer nothing in return beyond fair work for fair pay. It was a lonely existence, but it was safe, and safety had become important to him after losing everyone he loved in the space of a single terrible summer. But watching Olivia tonight had cracked something open in his carefully constructed armor, and now he could not stop thinking about her, about her quiet strength and her desperate circumstances, about the way she smiled even when she was clearly suffering, about the dark eyes that seemed to hold depths he wanted to explore. The next morning, Ethan made a decision. He went to the general store and bought supplies, flour and sugar and coffee and salt pork and dried beans, and everything else a person might need to stock a larder. Then he went to the butcher and bought fresh meat, and to the bakery for bread and pastries. He carried it all to the boarding house and asked the keeper, a sour-faced woman named Mrs. Henderson, which room belonged to Olivia Zimmerman. "Room 4 upstairs," Mrs. Henderson said, eyeing the packages with open curiosity. "But she is not here. She is at the saloon working." "I know. I want to leave these things in her room as a gift." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "A gift? What is your business with Miss Zimmerman?" "No business. I just want to help." "She will not take charity," Mrs. Henderson warned. "Proud as they come, that girl nearly drove me to distraction trying to work off her back rent instead of just accepting that I would carry her for a few weeks until she got on her feet." "This is not charity," Ethan said, though he was not entirely sure what it was. "Just one person helping another." Mrs. Henderson studied him for a long moment, then shrugged and led him upstairs to a narrow door at the end of the hall. The room beyond was tiny, barely large enough for a bed and a small dresser, and it was painfully neat, as if Olivia had tried to impose order on the chaos of her life through careful arrangement of her few possessions. A faded quilt covered the bed, and a single dress hung from a peg on the wall. There was nothing extra, nothing frivolous, just the bare necessities for survival. Ethan set the packages on the dresser, arranging them carefully, and then pulled out some money and laid it on top. It was more than he could really afford, $50 that represented a good portion of his savings from the cattle drive, but he found he did not care. The thought of Olivia going hungry, of her giving away her own food to help others while she suffered in silence, was intolerable to him. "Tell her," he said to Mrs. Henderson, "tell her that someone wanted her to have these things. Do not tell her who, not yet." "Why all the mystery?" Mrs. Henderson asked, but her voice had softened. "Why not just give them to her yourself, because she will refuse? You said yourself she is too proud for charity. This way, she cannot refuse what she does not know about until it is already done." Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. "You are a good man, whoever you are. Miss Zimmerman deserves some good fortune after all she has been through." Ethan wanted to ask what she meant by that, what Olivia had been through, but he did not want to pry into her private business. Instead, he thanked Mrs. Henderson and left, heading out to the ranch where he had agreed to look at the wild horses. The work proved challenging, spending the day evaluating a dozen half-broke Mustangs and negotiating terms with the rancher, but through it all, Ethan's mind kept returning to Olivia, wondering what her reaction would be when she discovered the supplies, hoping she would accept them even if she did not know where they came from. He returned to Castle Dome late in the afternoon and went straight to the saloon, telling himself he was just hungry and thirsty after a long day, but knowing the real reason was that he needed to see Olivia again. She was there, moving between tables with her characteristic grace, and he studied her carefully as he took his seat. She looked slightly better today, less exhausted, and there was a spark in her eyes that had been missing before. When she came to take his order, he saw that her hands were steady, and there was color in her cheeks that had not been there yesterday. "Good evening," she said, and her voice was stronger too. "What can I bring you?" "Whatever is good today," Ethan said, trying to sound casual. "And coffee if you have it." "We do. I will bring it right out." She turned to go, then paused and looked back at him. "I want to thank you," she said quietly. Ethan's heart began to pound. "Thank me? For what?" for the generous tip you left the other day. It was too much, but I appreciate it more than you know." "You earned it," Ethan said, relieved that she was talking about the dollar and not the supplies. "Best service I have had in any saloon from here to Texas." She smiled at that, a real smile that lit up her whole face, and Ethan felt his chest tighten with an emotion he could not quite name. Then she was gone, disappearing into the kitchen, and he was left alone with his thoughts and the realization that he was in serious danger of falling for this woman he barely knew. Over the next few days, Ethan settled into a routine. He took the job breaking horses for the rancher, work that kept him busy from dawn until mid-afternoon. And then he would return to Castle Dome and make his way to the saloon for dinner. He always sat at the same table, and Olivia always served him, and gradually they began to talk, small conversations that revealed little pieces of themselves to each other. He learned that she had come from St. Louis, that her father had died when she was young, and her mother had passed just last year, leaving Olivia alone with no family and no prospects. She had come west hoping to find work as a teacher or governess, but when those positions failed to materialize, she had taken whatever job she could find to survive. She spoke matter-of-factly about her struggles, without self-pity or complaint, and Ethan found himself admiring her strength even more. In turn, he told her about his own past, about growing up on a farm in Texas, about losing his parents and heading west to escape the memories. He told her about the years of drifting, working cattle drives and mining camps and ranches, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. He did not tell her that she was the first person in nearly a decade who had made him want to stay in one place, that the thought of riding away from Castle Dome now filled him with a cold dread he did not fully understand. One evening, nearly a week after he had left the supplies in her room, Olivia sat down at his table after she had finished serving the other customers. It was late, and the saloon was nearly empty, just a few men playing cards in the corner and Joe wiping down the bar. "Can I talk to you about something?" she asked, her voice low and hesitant. "Of course," Ethan said, his pulse quickening. She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "Something strange happened a few days ago. I came home from work and found my room full of supplies. Food and money, more than I have seen in months. Mrs. Henderson said someone left them for me, but she would not say who." Ethan kept his face carefully neutral. "That sounds like good fortune." "It does, but I cannot accept gifts from strangers. It is not proper, and I do not want anyone to think that I am the kind of woman who would take advantage of a man's generosity in exchange for something else." "I do not think anyone would think that," Ethan said gently. "Maybe someone just wanted to help without expecting anything in return." "But why? What did I do to deserve such kindness?" "Maybe you do not have to do anything to deserve kindness. Maybe someone just saw that you needed help and wanted to provide it." Olivia looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his face. "It was you, was it not? You are the one who left those things." Ethan considered denying it, but he found he could not lie to her. "Yes," he admitted. "It was me." "But why? You barely know me." "I know enough," Ethan said, leaning forward. "I know that you work yourself to exhaustion to maintain your independence. I know that you give away your own food to help people who are suffering even more than you are. I know that you are kind and strong and deserving of help, even if you are too proud to ask for it." "You saw me," Olivia whispered, and there was something like wonder in her voice. "That night when I gave my dinner to Mrs. Patterson and her children. You saw me do that." "I did, and I could not stand the thought of you going hungry while I had more than enough. So I did something about it. If that offends you, I am sorry, but I would do it again in a heartbeat." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes and she brushed them away impatiently. No one has ever done anything like that for me before. I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything. Just accept the help and use it to take care of yourself. That is all I ask. I should pay you back." "No," Ethan said firmly. "That was a gift, not a loan. You do not owe me anything." Olivia sat in silence for a long moment, clearly struggling with her pride and her gratitude. Finally, she looked up at him again, and there was something new in her eyes, something soft and vulnerable that made Ethan's breath catch. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for seeing me, for caring enough to help. I will never forget what you did." "You are welcome," Ethan said, and without thinking, he reached across the table and took her hand. It was small and warm in his, the fingers calloused from hard work, and when she did not pull away, he felt a surge of hope so strong it almost overwhelmed him. They sat like that for a few minutes, hands clasped across the table, neither speaking, just being together in the quiet saloon. Then Joe called out that it was closing time and the moment was broken. Olivia stood up, gently pulling her hand free, and smiled down at Ethan. "Will you walk me home?" she asked. "I would be honored," Ethan said, standing and offering her his arm. They walked through the dark streets of Castle Dome together, moving slowly, neither of them in any hurry to reach the boarding house. The night air was cool after the heat of the day, and overhead the stars blazed in the clear desert sky. Ethan told her about the horses he was breaking, describing their different personalities and quirks, and Olivia laughed at his stories, the sound like music in the darkness. When they reached the boarding house, they stood outside for a long moment, neither wanting to say goodbye. Finally, Ethan gathered his courage and spoke the words that had been building inside him all week. "Olivia, I know we have not known each other long, but I feel like I have been looking for you my whole life without knowing it. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I would like to spend more time with you, if you are willing. Not just at the saloon, but properly, courting you the way you deserve." Olivia's face was unreadable in the darkness, and for a terrible moment Ethan thought he had made a mistake, had pushed too far too fast. Then she reached up and touched his cheek, her hand gentle against his sun-roughened skin. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "I have been alone for so long, and you make me feel like maybe I do not have to be alone anymore." Ethan covered her hand with his own, holding it against his face. "You will never be alone again, not if I have anything to say about it." She leaned forward and kissed him then, just a soft brush of lips against lips, but it felt like a promise, like the beginning of something that could change everything. When she pulled back, she was smiling, and Ethan thought he had never seen anything as beautiful as Olivia Zimmerman standing in the starlight, her eyes bright with hope and something that might have been love. Over the following weeks, Ethan and Olivia spent every free moment together. He would finish his work with the horses in the early afternoon, and then ride into town to meet her, and they would walk through the desert hills surrounding Castle Dome, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his dreams of someday owning his own ranch, of building something permanent that could not be taken away by death or disease or bad luck. She told him about her love of books and learning, about how she had once dreamed of going to college back east but knew it was impossible now, about how she sometimes felt like she was meant for more than just scraping by in a frontier town. "You are meant for more," Ethan assured her. "You are meant for everything good this world has to offer, and I want to be the one who gives it to you." They went to church socials together, and Ethan endured the knowing looks and whispered comments of the townspeople, who had clearly decided that the drifting cowboy and the lonely serving girl made a perfect match. Olivia blushed at the attention but did not deny it, and Ethan found he did not mind being the subject of gossip if it meant everyone knew that Olivia was spoken for. He continued to help her in small ways, paying her rent when Mrs. Henderson mentioned she was behind again, leaving money with the general store owner to credit her account, making sure she always had enough to eat. Olivia protested at first, insisting she could take care of herself, but Ethan wore down her resistance with patience and persistence. "Let me do this," he would say. "Not because you are weak or incapable, but because I care about you and I want to make your life easier. Is that so wrong?" And eventually, she would relent, accepting his help with grace if not complete comfort. And Ethan would feel that same surge of protective tenderness that had become his constant companion whenever he was around her. One Sunday afternoon in late October, they rode out to an abandoned ranch about 5 miles north of Castle Dome. The original owner had died without heirs, and the property had been sitting empty for years, slowly decaying under the harsh Arizona sun. But the land was good, with a creek that ran year-round and enough grazing for a decent herd, and the house, though damaged, had good bones. "This place could be something special," Ethan said as they stood looking at the weathered buildings. "With some work and investment, it could be a real working ranch again." "Are you thinking of buying it?" Olivia asked, shading her eyes against the sun as she studied the house. "I am thinking about it. The bank is willing to sell it cheap, and I have been saving money for years. I almost have enough for a down payment, and if I can line up work for the next few months, I could probably make it happen by spring." "That would be wonderful," Olivia said, and there was genuine enthusiasm in her voice. "You would be so good at running your own place. I can see it already, you building it up into something prosperous and successful." Ethan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I do not want to do it alone, Olivia. I want to do it with you. I want this to be our ranch, our home, our future together." Olivia's eyes widened and her breath caught. "Ethan, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I love you," Ethan said, the words coming easily now that he had started. "I have loved you almost from the first moment I saw you, and every day I love you more. I know I am not much, just a drifter with more ambition than sense, but I promise you that if you will have me, I will spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me, Olivia? Will you take a chance on a future with me?" Tears streamed down Olivia's face, but she was smiling, a radiant smile that seemed to light up the whole desert. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Ethan. I think I have loved you since that first night when you looked at me like I mattered, like I was worth caring about. Yes, I will marry you and build a life with you and be the happiest woman in the entire Arizona territory." Ethan pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly this time. A deep, passionate kiss that held all the love and hope and promise he felt for their future together. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless and laughing, giddy with joy and the sudden certainty that they had found something rare and precious. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Castle Dome, with half the town in attendance. Olivia wore a simple white dress that Ethan had bought for her in Yuma, and she looked so beautiful that Ethan felt his eyes sting with tears as she walked down the aisle toward him. The ceremony was short and traditional, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed his bride with such tenderness that several of the older women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The townspeople threw a reception in the saloon, transforming the rough establishment into something almost elegant with white cloths on the tables and wildflowers in mason jars. There was food and music and dancing, and Ethan held Olivia close as they swayed to a fiddle tune, both of them aware that this was the beginning of their real life together. That night, in the small room above the boarding house that would be theirs until they could move to the ranch, Ethan made love to his wife with a gentleness and passion that left them both shaken. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Olivia traced patterns on Ethan's chest with her finger. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered. "I was so alone, so tired of fighting just to survive, and then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I did not even know I had said." "I was lost until I found you," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I did not even know what I was looking for, but the moment I saw you, I knew. You are my home, Olivia. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Ethan thought that he had never felt more content, more certain that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The next months were a blur of activity. Ethan worked every job he could find, saving every penny toward the purchase of the ranch. Olivia continued working at the saloon, though Ethan hated the idea of his wife serving drinks to rough men. But she insisted, pointing out that they needed her income if they were going to achieve their dream of owning the ranch by spring. "I am not going to sit idle while you work yourself to death," she said firmly. "We are partners now, and that means we both contribute." So Ethan swallowed his pride and let her work, though he made a point of being at the saloon every evening to walk her home, making sure everyone knew that Olivia Reeves was under his protection. In December, tragedy struck when a fire broke out in one of the buildings near the saloon. Ethan was there within minutes, organizing a bucket brigade and helping to evacuate people from nearby structures. The fire was eventually brought under control, but not before destroying 3 buildings and leaving several families homeless. That night, Olivia came to Ethan with tears in her eyes. "We have to help them," she said. "The Johnsons and the Weavers, they have nothing left. Everything they owned burned up." "We will help," Ethan assured her, though he knew it would set back their plans for the ranch. "We will do whatever we can." They opened their small room to the Johnson family, a young couple with a baby, sleeping on the floor so the family could have the bed. Olivia cooked meals and shared their supplies, and Ethan spent his weekends helping to rebuild the burned structures. Other townspeople pitched in too, and within a month, new buildings stood where the old ones had been, and the displaced families had roofs over their heads again. The Johnsons were effusive in their gratitude, insisting that Ethan and Olivia had saved them during their darkest hour. "We will never forget what you did for us," Mrs. Johnson said, clutching Olivia's hands. "You gave us everything when you barely had enough for yourselves. That is true Christian charity." "We just did what anyone would do," Olivia said, but Ethan could see that she was pleased by the recognition, that helping others gave her a sense of purpose that went beyond her own survival. By February 1883, Ethan had finally saved enough money for the down payment on the ranch. He went to the bank and signed the papers, and when he walked out, he was the legal owner of 200 acres of Arizona territory and all the buildings on it. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of his life, knowing that he had committed himself to this place, that he could no longer drift away when things got difficult. But when he told Olivia the news, watching her face light up with joy and excitement, he knew he had made the right decision. This was what he wanted, a home and a wife and a future that stretched out before them full of possibility. They moved to the ranch the following week, loading their meager possessions into a borrowed wagon and making the journey north from Castle Dome. The house was in worse shape than Ethan had remembered, with holes in the roof and broken windows and a door that hung crooked on its hinges. But Olivia looked at it with shining eyes and declared it perfect, already planning how they would fix it up and make it beautiful. They spent the next months working from dawn until long after dark, repairing the house and outbuildings, clearing brush and mending fences. Ethan bought a small herd of cattle from a rancher near Yuma, 20 head that would form the foundation of their operation. Olivia planted a garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn desert soil, and learned to cook over the temperamental stove in the kitchen. It was hard work, harder than anything either of them had done before, but it was their work, building something that belonged to them, creating a home and a life together. At night, they would collapse into bed exhausted but satisfied, and Ethan would hold Olivia close and marvel at how much his life had changed in less than a year. In June, Olivia told him she was pregnant. She made the announcement over breakfast one morning, her face glowing with a mixture of joy and nervousness. "Are you happy?" she asked when Ethan sat there in stunned silence, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. "Happy," Ethan repeated, then a grin spread across his face, wide and genuine. "Olivia, I am more than happy. I am ecstatic. We are going to have a baby." He jumped up and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed and told him to be careful. Then he set her down gently and pressed his hand to her still flat stomach, overcome with wonder at the life growing inside her. "You are going to be a wonderful mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And you are going to be a wonderful father," she replied, covering his hand with hers. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Olivia continued to work alongside Ethan on the ranch, though he insisted she take more breaks and avoid the heavier tasks. Her body changed gradually, her belly swelling with their child, and Ethan found himself constantly amazed by the miracle of it, by the fact that they had created a new life together. In November, Doc Williams from Castle Dome came out to the ranch to check on Olivia and pronounced her healthy and strong. "This baby should come around the end of January," he said. "Everything looks good, but make sure she gets plenty of rest and good food. And you," he pointed at Ethan, "make sure you can get her to town quickly if there are any problems. Winter babies can be tricky." Ethan assured the doctor he would take every precaution, and after Doc Williams left, he built up the fire in the bedroom and made sure they had plenty of wood stacked and supplies laid in for the winter. He was not going to take any chances with Olivia or their baby. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly at the ranch, just the two of them. Ethan had carved a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and rubbing it with oil until it gleamed. Olivia had sewn tiny clothes and blankets, her needle flying as she prepared for the baby's arrival. They exchanged small gifts and ate a special dinner, and Ethan thought that he had never been happier in his entire life. On January 28, 1884, Olivia went into labor. It was just after dawn, and Ethan was out checking on the cattle when she called to him from the house, her voice strained but calm. He ran back and found her leaning against the kitchen table, breathing hard through a contraction. "It is time," she said. "The baby is coming." Ethan's mind went blank with panic for a moment, then training and instinct kicked in. He got Olivia settled in their bed, made sure there was hot water and clean cloths ready, and then rode like the devil himself was chasing him to fetch Doc Williams from Castle Dome. The doctor returned with him, and together they supported Olivia through the long hours of labor. It was hard, harder than Ethan had imagined, watching his wife in pain and being unable to do anything to help. But Olivia was strong, stronger than he had given her credit for, and she bore the contractions with gritted teeth and determination. Finally, as the sun was setting, painting the bedroom walls with golden light, their son was born. Doc Williams placed the squalling infant in Olivia's arms, and Ethan looked down at his family with tears streaming down his face. The baby was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same brown as his mother's. He had strong lungs and waved his tiny fists in the air, as if already protesting the indignity of being born. "What should we name him?" Olivia asked, looking up at Ethan with exhausted joy. Ethan thought for a moment, then smiled. "William, after the doctor who helped bring him into the world, William James Reeves." "William," Olivia repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, William. Welcome to the world, little one." Doc Williams stayed overnight to make sure both mother and baby were doing well, and then he returned to Castle Dome, refusing payment beyond the cost of his supplies. "You two helped half this town when they needed it," he said gruffly. "Consider this my way of paying you back." The first weeks with a newborn were overwhelming. William seemed to need constant attention, crying at all hours and keeping both parents awake at night. But Ethan found he did not mind the exhaustion, not when it meant holding his son and watching Olivia nurse him, seeing the tender way she cradled William against her chest. This was what life was supposed to be, this messy, chaotic, beautiful reality of family and home and love. As William grew, the ranch prospered. Ethan's hard work paid off, and the herd increased, bringing in enough money to make improvements and even hire a couple of hands to help with the heavy work. Olivia created a home that was warm and welcoming, full of small touches that made the house feel lived in and loved. She hung curtains she had sewn herself, arranged wildflowers in vases, cooked meals that made the kitchen smell like heaven. When William was 6 months old, the Johnsons came out to visit, bringing news from Castle Dome and a hand-carved toy horse for the baby. They stayed for dinner, and afterward, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Mr. Johnson turned to Ethan. "You remember that night when the fire destroyed our house?" he asked. "When you and Olivia took us in even though you barely had enough room for yourselves?" "Of course," Ethan said. "We were happy to help." "Well, I have been doing some thinking and I want to repay that kindness. I have a brother in California who is looking for a business partner, and he has offered me a position. It is a good opportunity, but it means leaving Castle Dome. I am planning to sell my freight business, and I want to offer you first chance to buy it." Ethan sat up straighter. "Your freight business, but that is worth a lot of money. I could never afford it." "I will sell it to you for half what it is worth," Mr. Johnson said, "and you can pay me over time, no interest. You saved my family, Ethan. Let me help yours in return." It was an incredible offer, one that would give Ethan another source of income to supplement the ranch. He looked at Olivia and she nodded, her eyes encouraging him to accept this generous gift. "Thank you," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "I do not know what to say except thank you. I will take good care of the business, I promise you that." They shook hands, and the deal was done. Within a month, Ethan owned a freight company that hauled goods between Castle Dome and Yuma, and between his ranch work and the freight business, he was making more money than he had ever dreamed possible. They were not rich by any means, but they were comfortable, secure in a way that had seemed impossible just 2 years earlier when he had been a drifting cowboy and Olivia had been going hungry to help others. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm. William grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed Ethan around the ranch, trying to help with chores in his clumsy, endearing way. Olivia became pregnant again, and in December of 1885, she gave birth to a daughter they named Emma. Then came another son, Samuel, in 1887, and finally another daughter, Clara, in 1889. The house that had seemed so empty when they first moved in was now full of noise and laughter and the organized chaos of raising 4 children. Ethan built additions to accommodate their growing family, adding bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. The ranch continued to prosper, and the freight business grew, eventually requiring Ethan to hire managers so he could focus on being with his family. Through it all, Ethan and Olivia's love only deepened. They had built something remarkable together, not just a successful ranch and business, but a true home filled with love and security, and the kind of happiness that came from facing challenges together and emerging stronger. Ethan never forgot that first night in the saloon when he had seen Olivia give away her own meal to help someone in need. Never forgot the compassion and strength that had drawn him to her. And Olivia never forgot how Ethan had seen her suffering and responded with generosity and kindness, how he had shared everything he had without expecting anything in return. Years passed, and their children grew. William inherited his father's love of ranching and took over much of the day-to-day operations. Emma became a teacher, fulfilling Olivia's old dream of education and learning. Samuel went into business with a freighting company in Phoenix, and Clara married a young lawyer from Tucson and started her own family. Ethan and Olivia grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love remaining constant. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the desert hills, holding hands and remembering the journey that had brought them to this point. "You ever regret it?" Olivia asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. "Giving up the drifting life to settle down here with me." Ethan turned to look at her, this woman who had been his wife for nearly 40 years, and he smiled. "Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Olivia. You and our children and this life we built together. I was lost before I found you, wandering without purpose or direction. You gave me a reason to stay in one place, to build something permanent, to believe in a future. How could I ever regret that?" Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The ranch spread out around them, a testament to years of hard work and love and determination. The house was full of grandchildren who came to visit, filling the rooms with noise and energy. The business continued to thrive, providing security and opportunity for generations to come. It was a good life, a rich life, built on a foundation of compassion and generosity. Ethan had shared everything he had with Olivia, not just his material possessions, but his heart and his dreams and his unwavering commitment. And Olivia had given him the same in return, creating a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. In 1920, Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 64, worn out by years of hard work but satisfied with everything he had accomplished. Olivia mourned him deeply, but she took comfort in knowing that they had lived a full and beautiful life together, that their love had created something lasting that would continue long after they were both gone. She lived another 6 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren, and when she finally joined Ethan in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, the whole town of Castle Dome turned out to pay their respects. She was remembered not just as the wife of a successful rancher, but as a woman who had embodied compassion and strength, who had given freely to others even when she had little to give, who had built a family and a community through love and determination. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a working reminder of what two people could build when they found each other and refused to let go. The story of how they met became part of family lore, passed down from grandparents to grandchildren, a tale of love and generosity in a harsh land. William, their eldest son, would tell his own children about the night his father saw his mother give away her meal and decided to share everything he had. "That is what real love looks like," he would say. "Not just pretty words or romantic gestures, but seeing someone's need and responding with your whole heart. That is what your grandmother and grandfather taught us, and that is how we should live our own lives. And those lessons continued, shaping the family for generations, ensuring that the legacy of Ethan and Olivia Reeves was not just the land and buildings and money they left behind, but the example of how to love and live with generosity and compassion. In the harsh desert of Arizona, where survival often seemed like the only goal, they had proven that there was room for kindness, for seeing others suffering and doing something about it, for sharing everything you had with someone in need. The old saloon in Castle Dome eventually closed, replaced by more modern establishments, but people still told stories about the serving girl who gave away her food and the cowboy who fell in love with her. The boarding house where Olivia had lived became a historical landmark, and tourists would visit to see the tiny room where a great love story had begun. But for those who knew the truth, who had been there or heard the stories firsthand, it was never about the buildings or the places. It was about two people who found each other in a lonely town in the middle of nowhere, who recognized something precious in each other and refused to let it go. It was about a man who saw a woman's quiet desperation and responded with generosity, and a woman who saw a man's lonely drifting and gave him a reason to stay. It was about sharing everything, not because you had to, but because you wanted to, because love meant opening your hands and your heart and giving freely without expectation of return. That was the real legacy of Ethan and Olivia Reeves, a legacy that lived on long after the ranch was sold and the descendants scattered across the country. It lived in acts of kindness, in moments of generosity, in the decision to see another person's suffering and do something about it. It lived in every person who chose love over loneliness, community over isolation, giving over hoarding. In the end, their story was simple but profound. A cowboy learned that a woman had not eaten because she gave her meal away, and he shared everything he had. From that single act of recognition and generosity, a love was born that changed everything, creating not just a family but a legacy of compassion that rippled out across generations. It was a love story for the ages, set against the harsh beauty of the Arizona desert, a reminder that even in the hardest places and the most difficult times, love and kindness could not just survive but thrive, building something beautiful and lasting that would endure long after the people themselves had returned to dust. Their graves sat side by side on the hill overlooking the ranch, two simple headstones marking the resting place of two remarkable people. And on spring mornings, when the desert bloomed with wildflowers and the air was sweet with the promise of new life, you could almost imagine you heard their voices carried on the wind, still talking and laughing together, still sharing everything they had, still bound by the love that had transformed two lonely souls into something greater than either had been alone. That love had started in a dusty saloon in Castle Dome, Arizona, in September of 1882, when a tired cowboy looked across a room and saw a woman giving away her last meal to someone in need. He had made a choice that night, a choice to care, to help, to share everything he had. And that choice had led to a lifetime of happiness, a family that spanned generations, and a legacy of love that would never be forgotten.